Hi, and welcome to Sacred Intelligence TV. As always, I'm so delighted that you've joined me. We've all heard those stories where someone has reacted in an irrational way out of anger, fear, or frustration, and sometimes we've wondered what on earth got into them. Well, their response is usually something like, "I don't know what happened. My emotions got the best of me." We've been in that situation ourselves when we've said our emotions have gotten the best of us. And it doesn't take a situation that is overwhelming or frustrating or angry where our emotions get the best of us. In fact, when we choose not to accept a job or venture out into our own business because we don't feel good enough or we don't feel worthy, that's our emotions getting the very best of us. When we choose not to do that solo performance as a singer, a dancer, or a pianist, whatever the situation is, that's our emotions getting the best of us. When we choose to stay in a relationship or not get involved in a relationship because we are fearful or we've been traumatized in some way, that's our emotions getting the best of us. Our emotions get the best of us when we do not allow ourselves to step out and to go beyond what we are feeling in that moment and live our fullest potential. Our emotions have the best of us because we aren't living our best selves. But today, we're going to hear more about how we can become emotionally free. I'm so excited today to have with me today, my guest, Catherine Ewing. I want to tell you a little bit about her, but I do want to say Susan is out today. She's not feeling well, and we do wish her better spirits and better health, and she'll join us on our next show. But Catherine is a licensed clinical social worker. She has her master's in divinity. She is the founder of Emotional Freedom at Last, and she really is a transformational life mentor. There's so much that Catherine has to tell us about her life that will help you see how she mentors other people in her work. But Catherine is also a healer. And she's an expert in emotional freedom, and we're going to learn a little bit more about that. Catherine has done a lot of work with the Newtown, Connecticut citizens, and she'll talk a little bit about that, I'm sure, as she's sharing her journey with us. And there's so much more that I could tell you about her, but I think it's really important that she shares her own story. So today, what we are going to do in the first part of our show is that we'll hear from Catherine as she talks about her spiritual, her personal, and her professional journey. As you know, that fits well into what we do with our Sacred, Selfish, and Shared. But in the second half of the show, and you don't want to miss this, she'll be talking more about emotional freedom, and we'll figure out or we'll learn how to do tapping. So please stay tuned for that. But I want to welcome to the show Catherine Ewing. Catherine, thank you.
I am so excited.
Delighted. I am so delighted that you are here because Catherine and I actually belong to a group together, a networking group together, and so we both have this combination of therapy and spirituality.
And
so
ministry.
We're so excited about that. So tell us a little bit about your spiritual journey.
In this lifetime?
In this lifetime. I don't have time to go back to the other lifetimes.
So I was raised Catholic, and as a very little girl, felt very connected to the Blessed Mother. And I can remember, probably 6 or 7 years old, I went to Catholic school, and I was distressed because I found out that girls couldn't be priests. So right from the get-go, I was both moved by some of the ritual and the mystical, even then, sort of the sacred aspect of church and religion, and not all that thrilled with sort of the man-made rule end of it. And so I've always had this kind of alternating feelings about organized religion, but clearly there was a spiritual part of me. And I can remember even as a kid, thinking that I wanted to be, if I couldn't be a priest, I guess I would be a nun. I wasn't thrilled with that option, but there weren't that many other choices at that time. But I can remember, and I thought everybody did this, I can remember imagining that when the church was going to be overrun by marauders. Now, this was in the 1960s. There probably weren't all that many marauders out there. That I would be the one that was going to protect the host.
Now, how old were you when you were thinking this?
This was elementary school age.
Wow.
So between 2nd and 6th grade, because I was at Our Lady of the Valley School, and I can remember we would have to go to church for First Friday, and a lot of time spent in church. And I remember having those thoughts that, well, if the church was ever attacked, I would be the one to protect the host and keep it sacred. And so who has those thoughts? But I just thought all Catholic kids had those thoughts.
I think that many people have thoughts as it relates to their sacredness and their sacred space and their love of God, or however they practice their spirituality. So for me, it sounds like what you were doing was just being in tune with the sacred so very early on, and thinking, I need to protect this. And I'll just tell you, the way you started with saying you were upset that only men could be priests, that's a whole nother show for us to get into.
Show. Yes, it is. Yes.
We still have those issues today, correct?
But it comes full circle because we moved, my family moved after the end of 6th grade year for me. And in 7th grade, I started attending another Catholic church, but it was run by Franciscan friars. And it was a very different energy than the sort of more mainstream, Catholic churches. And I fell in love with the Franciscans and St. Francis of Assisi. And I started carrying the prayer of St. Francis around with me, as a 13 or 14-year-old girl. And years later, as part of my spiritual path in, my 50s, I was drawn to a ministry to become a minister of spiritual peacemaking in a program that brought together the masculine and feminine energies, that looked at the work of St. Francis of Assisi and Lady Clare, and really sort of came full circle to me. So now I can be ordained. I am a minister, certainly not in the church that I was raised in, but in a tradition that really speaks to me on so many levels, about marrying that masculine and feminine energy and really bringing the feminine back into a place of honor and respect, back onto the planet when we need it so much to balance out the more masculine. And I don't just mean men, but the energy of the masculine, that more driven and, driven and needing that nurturing and caring and intuitive energy that women, the feminine energy, tends to bring more.
And I think that if we're talking about this in a broader sense, but the male-female, it's just women minister in a very different way than men minister. And it's just the way we were created. So it's good to have those two things marrying, even if you think from, Catholicism and with my beliefs, my religious beliefs in the Bible, really they're both male and female images of God there. So whatever we are practicing, it should be inclusive of those things. And not because we're trying to be politically correct, but
because our Christed selves includes all of those energies.
So that's been your spiritual journey then, in terms of coming. I wanted to know though, you did your Master's of Divinity.
Yes. So for many years, so I, in my younger years, I was more connected, and then, as we do, we get older and we sort of get disconnected. When I had children, I attended a congregational church because I wanted to bring them up, with some religious foundation, but I wasn't feeling drawn to bring them up in the Catholic Church, but it still wasn't the right message or energy for me. I, as you mentioned, am a licensed clinical social worker. For many years, did very grassroots social work, and I'm sure we'll talk about that some more. But when my daughter, who is now 22, after she was born, I actually started to do psychotherapy, which I never thought I would do. And I found out very quickly that I didn't really care for traditional psychotherapy. And I thought, oh, that's why I didn't do this, 20 some odd years ago when I got my master's degree. But what that did was spark me onto a more spiritual path, because I wanted to, not only did I want to, but I was really guided to find other ways of working with clients that would go deeper and bring about what I felt would be just more transformation, more real healing at a deeper level.
But what I think is really powerful about what you're saying, one of the things that we always talk about on the show is being in tune with what the sacred is saying to you, that's your calling and your purpose, and if we avail ourselves to it, it comes. And so for you, when you started working as a therapist, you're saying, this is not it.
This is not it. I have a headache. I don't feel like I'm being very helpful here.
Being in tune with what is the sacred guiding you to do, and that's
so so I ended up started doing my own meditation practice, and then of course journaling, and then all of a sudden all these spiritual books were coming to me that were very different than the more traditional religious books. And I became trained in 6 or 7 different kind of healing modalities, again just looking for ways both to work with clients, but by then it was really for my own growth and transformation as well. And I happened to be on the computer one day, and I'd been thinking about maybe doing a doctoral program. I just was feeling this sense within me that I should be doing something more. I didn't really know what it was, but I was kind of searching around thinking, well, maybe I could find like a school that would just provide an umbrella for me to put together the pieces that I wanted to do, which was the spirituality, the metaphysics, the women's studies, and I happened to be in my basement online, and an email came through from a guy by the name of James Twineman. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he's known as a peace troubadour, and he had at that point had just come back from Bosnia, where he had had some amazing spiritual experiences. And he was guided at that time to start a seminary program. And he described the program, which was what I just said. It was going to be about the work of St. Francis of Assisi, Mary Magdalene, and Jesus, or Yeshua, as divine partners, teachers, master teachers, and also bringing in the peace prayers of all the major spiritual traditions. And I was literally, I'm reading that email, I'm sobbing, my whole body was vibrating, and I said, oh, maybe this is the program I was looking for. And I just knew, like my whole body was telling me, right? You talk about that mind-body-spirit connection. There wasn't a doubt in my mind.
But that's the synchronicity, isn't it? So that once we open ourselves up to what we are looking for and what we're feeling called to do, it comes to us. And one of the things I was thinking about as you were talking, often we're territorial with our religion and our spirituality, and everybody wants to say, well, my religion is it, not yours.
Like nationalism.
But really, when you think about it, what I'm hearing you say, because I know some people will listen to this and say, what the heck is she talking about with the energy and all of this? But if you look at the basic tenets of all of these different practices, there are some things that are common in all of them. And really the spiritual work that we need to do, or that I feel that we're called to do, is to really be in tune with sacred. And for me, sacred is God, and being like-minded and one-minded with what is it that...
Whatever we...
Right.
Whatever name we use.
Whatever name you use. What is it that you're called to do? What is it that... What's your purpose in life for you to do in a way that's service to you and service to others, and of course service to our spiritual men. I think I heard you say in another interview, I don't remember exactly what you were talking about, but you were talking about the mind of God, being like-minded.
Being one with the mind of God.
Exactly. So I think that, rather than sometimes struggling with this religion versus this religion, and I hold fast to my religion. I'm not saying that I don't. Before anybody beats me up about that, I hold fast to my Christian beliefs that I have. But I also know that I'm open to hearing what other people have to say, because really, I feel like the sacred is so awesome and so powerful. Why would I define the sacred based on this little box here? But anyway, let's get back to you and your journey, because I want to hear, and you can say more about your spiritual journey as you're going on, but I want to hear about your personal. I want to make sure we have time to do your personal and professional before we go into the emotional freedom. So tell us a little bit about, obviously that's your personal journey as well.
So a lot of that was happening while I was still working in private practice. So in whatever year that was, 1993, when my daughter was about 1, I went into private practice, and then all of this was happening, all of this transformation was happening while I was there. And I had a sense that I would be leaving there at some point to open a healing center. I had no idea what that meant, and I knew that I would know when the time was right.
Okay.
So 2004, I entered my seminary program, and later that year, September of that year, I went to my first retreat as part of the seminary program, and it became very clear to me at that retreat that it was time for me to move on. Now, you want to talk about synchronicity and how things work. I don't know that I was even gone a full week. When I came back, the practice that I had worked in for 11 years had been audited by the Labor Department while I was away. And they had decided that we were not really all independent contractors, because we pretty much did the same thing, and they had to move to an employee model. And it was like the universe just opened the door and said to me, okay, are you going to stay and go back into this sort of model, or are you going to now step through this opening? And it was a matter of months. I let them know, because I had been talking to them all along about the possibility that I would leave. And so I came back at the beginning of October in 2004 from my retreat, and at the end of November, I left to open my healing center called Spirit Matters. One of the other women who was in that practice, who did not want to go into an employee model either, came with me, as a leap of faith, because she was not at that point as much into sort of the alternative work and the energy work, but she was interested and open. She did EMDR, so she understood some aspects.
Could you tell our viewers what EMDR is, because we use these?
Yeah, so EMDR, and forgive me because I am not an EMDR therapist, but it's a form of therapy where it works a lot with relieving the symptoms of trauma, right? And it's eye movement desensitization and reprogramming. And so it uses tapping, and it uses the energy of the body to help shift the effects of the trauma. So there were some similarities with what she was doing and the Reiki and the other kinds of energy healing modalities that I was doing. I had not yet learned EFT. And I had done Reiki on her, and a light bulb sort of went off, and she said, wow, and she started looking at the connection. So anyway, she came with me, and we opened Spirit Matters together, and we had that center together. We each had our own therapy practices, and then we brought people in for workshops and yoga and qigong. And
so I think what's really interesting and very powerful to hear is that sometimes we're forced into situations because perhaps if you had gone and they weren't audited, you'd still work there for a little bit longer. But sometimes you have to just, some of us have to have that little push to go ahead and say, hey, let's do this.
Well, when I look back in my life, and certainly I can see this with clients and other people too, but when I look back at these important junctures, that has always happened. So Lisa and I were in business together for 7 years. I started feeling the call to really move out so that I could build my own practice more, because when you're running a center, you're running a center.
Sure.
And I had done a whole lot of other training and coaching certifications in the meantime, and I was feeling called to focus more on growing my own business. Literally, Carolyn, I mean, you can't make this stuff up, right? One day I went into Lisa's office. I said, Lisa, can we have a conversation at some point? I want to just tell you what's on my mind. It's nothing really immediate, but this is kind of where, and her client canceled for that hour. So we literally sat down. We started to have this conversation. Our landlord, who was in the building next door, who had not we hadn't had a lease with him for like a year and a half. It just lapsed, and he was kind of ADHD, and he never got around to getting us a new one. Literally, as we were having that conversation, his secretary walked over, handed us a new lease that increased and it was like, okay, there's our answer.
There's your answer right there.
Right there.
Yeah, and sometimes you don't have to go through this, let me figure this out. Sometimes you have to just say, wait a minute.
Yeah.
This is the answer.
Yeah. I mean, the timing of it was just unbelievable. Mm-hmm. And, I think I may have mentioned this to you when we spoke, but the same thing literally happened to me. I left a 30-year marriage. It was a very, very difficult decision in 2007. And for years, I sort of heard, relax, you'll know when, the time will come when, don't force anything. And literally my youngest, who was my daughter, she's a manifester. She makes things happen in her life. And she manifested herself into private school.
Isn't that great?
Yeah, awesome. We took a $1 bill, we made it a $40,000 bill, we put it up on her mirror, and I said, just see yourself there, imagine yourself there. Well, she did. She got accepted into several different schools. We worked out a financial agreement with one of the schools. And literally, as we were driving home, after bringing her there, because she was going to be a boarding student, even though she was only like 20 minutes away. Yeah. She wanted the whole experience. I heard Spirit, whatever, say to me, we just opened the door. Again, we just created an opening
it's
for you.
I really want our viewing audience to hear this, is that when you are in tune with Spirit, you will know when it's time for you to do certain things. I think that you'll have people in your life who will try to push you one way or the other, but when you are connected, when you are like-minded with God, you will know when it's time for you to make the major decisions that you have to make in your life. And I want to just point out, what works for Catherine may not work for Terrellyn, and what works for Terrellyn may not work for you. You have to know how you interact and what your relationship is with the sacred. You have to know that. And sometimes, though, it does take people like Catherine and myself working with people in terms of just helping them to understand spirituality and faith and how it works, because we can be confused about those things as well. So you don't just wake up one day and say, oh, okay, this is what the Spirit said to me. But it does take some developing that practice. And I have
to say, my story for many years was, I don't get messages, I don't hear anything, what's the matter with me, what am I, chopped liver, everybody else knows what they're doing, and I'm like in the dark, and I'm so sincere, and I'm trying so hard, and I can't hear anything. Yes. So by no means do I consider myself somebody who's so in tune, or a channel, or a psychic, or anything like that. Just the opposite. I used to have my rants with God about, why don't you give me a clear message? Yeah. How come? Because bam, because I want to know. And yet, in those moments, when it was time to act, to take inspired action, where Spirit moves through you, right? Inspired, the breath of Spirit. It was so clear to me. I couldn't see, everybody else, they would get these Kodak movies in their mind and they could see all the stuff. I never had any of that.
But I think what happens, though, Catherine, is that when we are emotionally foggy and bogged down, we can't see anything anyway. And sometimes, the Spirit is trying to tell us something, but we can't see it. And that's where being released from some of this emotional stuff helps as well.
Yes.
But I do want to say that I think that we all are intuitive. I
Oh,
think
absolutely.
that we all have this special connection. It's just that we lose it. Because if you ever hear kids talking, they say the most amazing things, and you'll say, "Well, how did you know that?" Because they are still in tune, you
Yes,
know.
yes.
But somehow we lose it because we get so
Well, it
bogged
gets
down
denser.
with.
I mean,
Yes.
literally, when we're born, that opening is still there, right?
Yes,
And then
yes,
it closes
yes.
up, and then life comes at us, and people say, "What do you mean you have an imaginary friend?" Or "Stop daydreaming." Or
Exactly.
we need to daydream.
We
You
do.
said when we're foggy. When we're busy, I mean, I think busyness and distractibility and all of the things that are calling for our attention these days, all of this false sense of importance and urgency,
Sure.
the Facebook, the phone, the text message, the absolutely stops us.
And I think one of the key things, one of the things that I've been doing during this week in particular, has just been riding in my car without the music on, not being on the phone, on my headset, any
Yeah.
of that, unless I just have to be for something. But it's about, let me just tune everything out because I can't hear from Spirit.
Or
if
let
there's
me
so many,
tune in.
right? But I need to
That
tune out the
requires tuning
distraction.
out.
Exactly, exactly.
Right.
And I think that when we do that, we can hear. And I'm sure you've had those moments where, I know I've been in therapy with a client, and clearly Spirit is speaking to me, and because I'll just get this feeling, I'll go, okay, and then
Right.
my conversations with my client is then very different.
All right, it's a very different energy when we're working from our head or when we're working from our heart, which is, I think, where Spirit always speaks to us.
Can you tell me a little bit about, in terms of the personal piece, because you've talked a bit about the professional in there as well. Tell me, if you don't mind, in terms of making that decision to leave after a number of years, that must have been very difficult for you. And I know in the work that you do, you have to help people deal with very hard decisions. And so in some ways, you know, obviously that was a hard decision. Even when Spirit says do it, it doesn't mean that it was easy.
Right,
So can
no.
you just talk a little bit about how you got through that? And
It was very difficult because, you know, I was married for 30 years, and it was not a bad marriage. In fact, you know, it's almost embarrassing to say this, but there were times when I wished he would be sort of a jerk, you know, go drink or, you know, gamble or that just wasn't who he was. It was really, you know, a matter of over time we just grew differently. And I talk about energy a lot and vibrational frequencies. And I know this may sound really strange for a lot of people, or almost like an excuse or I'm making up, but I think we just grew further apart energetically so that we were no longer a match for each other. We have 3 wonderful children, and so it was not easy. And yet we had grown apart emotionally, physically, psychologically, in so many ways that I couldn't imagine myself continuing in that relationship that felt stifled in so many ways. And trying to move through that with as much grace and love and gratitude for the years we did have together and for the beautiful children we had brought into the world, and still have to move forward in that. It's a very difficult path to walk. And I was saying to someone recently, I think in some ways it slowed me down in terms of working with other women specifically because I didn't want anybody to have to go through what I went through, or not to have to go through, because it was my choice. I didn't have to do anything. It was a choice that I made. But it was a very difficult choice. I moved out of my home, leaving, you know, my husband and children there because it was my decision. It didn't seem at all fair to me to ask him to leave. I didn't take anything with me except a twin bed and a dresser because I wasn't going to disrupt my children's home. I was already disrupting it enough. I was not interested in picking over furniture or anything else. So I literally moved into someone else's basement for 15 months till I could get my feet more solidly under me. I had left my paid employment, opened a healing center, left my marriage, like all within a very short period of time. So literally, my whole life was turned upside down.
So I want to be clear about something, because I am really big on people not making emotional decisions, because we do need to be practical in some of these things. So I'm not hearing you say these decisions were made from an emotional place, that it was really just the timing, and it was time to open the practice. It was time to move on with divorce, because clearly these were things you had thought about before, and so you weren't making them based on this big emotional...
No, not the emotion of the moment, like I'm angry and so I'm leaving, or you did this and so I'm out of here. It was a long period of time, probably over about 10 years. I feel like things started to shift within me shortly after my daughter was born. So it's a dilemma, because I'm a teacher of the law of attraction, and I know that what we focus on grows, right?
Sure.
And so I kept saying, I'm focusing on the positive, I'm looking at the good thing, and yet there was the part of me that was sort of knowing that this was not really going to last, the relationship. And so I was caught in this dilemma.
Well, because I think here's the hard part about what you're saying, and we both know how the laws of energy work, and that you do focus on the positive. That is all well and good, that we do want to put the positive energy out there, and what we put out there we get back. But we also know that the other person needs to do a little bit of work too, and sometimes other people can be so closed that they're not even in tune with the energy that's coming towards them, because they're repelling it each time it comes. But I know that you talk a little bit more about that when you talk about your vibrations. But when you were going through this, were you involved with EFT at all during that time?
I learned EFT in 2006. So yes, I'd been doing EFT for about a year, because I left my marriage in 2007. So that was still part of my, spiritual, well, it's all part of my, it's all the spiritual journey, right? All of it's the spiritual journey. But it was that continuation of looking for something to use with my clients that would be a bridge between talk therapy and the energy work. And I had continued to be trained in a lot of different energy healing modalities, and then in 2006 had the opportunity to learn Emotional Freedom Technique by Dr. Henry Grayson, who is in New York City. And it was like, oh, the perfect...
And you feel like it helped you as you were going through your personal...
Oh yes, I used it primarily with myself for a long time, even before I started introducing it with clients.
So how did you get past, you said earlier, you really didn't want other women to be in this position, because it was a painful position. So how did you get past that as a therapist when you're working with women and they're coming to you and they're saying, I'm in this place and I'm needing to make this decision? What finally got you to that place where you said, I have to?
Well, I think where it slowed me down was in the transition from therapist to sort of more of a coach mentor. And I don't want to get too out there with this, but I know, because I've had them clearly come to me on my own and also in working with other healers, I know that I have past lives where I have been the healer in the village, or the spiritual leader, or the teacher. And I also know that there have been times where I have suffered as a result of that, and that some of the women who followed me suffered as a result of that. And that was the energy, I think, that was holding me back, because somewhere in me I had this remembrance that other women suffered because they followed me. And actually it was doing EFT. And then also having some past life work done with some healer friends of mine, where that became really clear to me. And so the EFT was very instrumental in me clearing that energy, and also knowing that my path was not every woman's path. I mean, literally, my life turned upside down.
Well, and
not everybody else was going to do it the way I did.
Exactly, but also knowing that it's still their choice.
Yes.
I mean, I do know that there's a certain amount of influence that you have as a therapist, and so when people are coming to you, they are influenced by your story, but everybody has their choice.
Yes. And I became very clear that in no way did I want to glorify divorce or going out on your own or making impulsive decisions. Yes, that was a choice I made, but I'm not out there, yay, I'm divorced, celebrating. It was a sad experience for me. And not one that I would ever invite anyone to take lightly. You know, clearly I've worked in domestic violence, I've worked in, sexual assault, rape crisis work, child abuse. I know that there are some situations that women need to find the courage to leave. But there are many other situations where it's not that. And I really invite women, or both, with their partners, to really see if there's any way that they can heal that relationship.
Right. And I think that, I also want to just acknowledge, in all fairness, to those women who do stay in those relationships that are not good for them. I think that courage is one thing that they need, but I think that oftentimes there are other openers that people need in terms of leaving. People need to be very strategic in how they need to leave a situation, because if you are in a domestic violence situation, for instance, you may have the courage to want to leave, but you better have a plan, a safety plan
and
that's going to help you, and a support system and all of those things to leave. So I appreciate you saying that you're not advocating anyone doing that, because all of our stories are different. But at some point, though, if we're making our decision based on an emotion, we do need to sort of rid ourselves of that to kind of figure out, then what can we do? So I'd like for us to spend a little bit of time, because I don't want us to run out of time, talking about emotional freedom. And you at one point opened your center around emotional freedom at last. Did I?
Well, so when I had my center, it was called Spirit Matters. And under that umbrella, my personal business at the time was called Reawaken Your Dreamer, because I'm a certified dream coach. And so I used that business name and URL after I got my dream coach certification back in, 2008 or something like that. And I just, sometimes, again, we know it's time for a change. So just a few months ago, I rebranded, and because I wanted to represent, I love doing passion work and purpose work with women, really, especially women in midlife. We've given birth to our children, we've given birth to our careers, we've done a relationship, whatever state that's in. And developmentally, like, we come to a place where it's time to give birth to ourselves more authentically. And so that's the whole reawaken your dreamer, your passion and purpose. But before we can do that, we have to do exactly what you said, which is clear the emotional stuff that gets in the way of really stepping authentically into who we're here to be. And it just felt time to find a new name and a new way to represent what I did. And Emotional Freedom at Last was just what came for me. In fact, it went through a couple iterations. I actually had Helping Women Heal as the name of my business for a while we were working on the new website. But before we went live, something just didn't feel right about it. And so I landed on Emotional Freedom at Last, because it feels like it captures, so the emotional freedom is such a big piece, but the at last is,
You can breathe.
And so many of my clients say, oh my gosh, I've been in therapy for 20 years, or I've done therapy and hypnosis and energy work and medication, and I don't, have an issue with any of that. But the at last is, finally integrating it all and bringing it together in a way that actually.
So tell us a little bit about what the emotional freedom is, what you do with it, because in the work that I do, and I'm sure the work that you do as well, one of the things that we do is we get people to deal with their emotional stuff, because most often we want to put it aside and not deal with it, and sometimes we don't even know that we're carrying this emotional junk that's weighing us down. So when we choose not to step out there in a new job or a new position, we don't know that we're carrying something from our past or at some point that's impacted us. So one of the things that I do, of course, with the talk therapy is that we spend a lot of time working on all that muck that's there, but we also kind of think about, well, then what are the practical things that you need to do to get over it?
Right.
But with EFT and then also with EMDR, we kind of mentioned that before, those techniques are very different.
They're very different.
Not just, I don't want to say just. Because I feel like what I do is really important.
Valuable, of course.
But those techniques, really the results are very, very different and quicker in some ways, because with the tapping, which you'll demonstrate to us in a little bit, and you'll explain a little bit more about it, we're actually tapping into certain meridians.
It's energy, it's energy-based.
Okay.
So, one of my former spiritual teachers used to say, the mind only knows what the mind only knows. And if we look at that pyramid of the conscious mind and then the subconscious and the unconscious, we're talking 3 to 5%. I like to say, if you think of an iceberg, the part that you see above the surface is literally 3 to 5% of the mass of that iceberg, right?
Yes.
And it's all of that stuff that's under the surface that we don't see, that we don't know, because it's been pushed to a place in our subconscious or our unconscious mind that we don't know it. So we can't talk about it in talk therapy because we don't have access to it. So when we use EFT, Emotional Freedom Technique, or EMDR, we are literally tapping into what's below the surface so that we can bring it into conscious awareness, clear it, and this is where it might start sounding a little woo-woo to people, but we hold it in our energy field. So you can say we hold it in our subconscious, or we hold it in our cells, or we hold it in our mind-body, but it stays with us, it sticks to us. So just like an acupuncturist who will use needles to go in and along those lines of energy, those energy meridians, as they call them in Chinese medicine, will insert needles to break up clogged or blocked energy. We use EFT, acupuncture without needles, to tap on those meridian points to break up clogged energy. So if you imagine, say you're a little kid and you step out into the street and you see all of a sudden a car coming, right? And it's sort of this moment where you take an in-breath and your amygdala, that part of your brain that registers danger, danger, Bill Rogers, sends a message to the hypothalamus, and then all of this cascade of chemicals, adrenaline and cortisol, start running through your system, and it literally gets held, because you sort of don't ever let that breath or that energy cycle complete.
So I was thinking about this when I was listening to you on another show in preparation. I was just sort of listening and learning a lot more about EFT, and I thought about something that happened to me when I was younger. Now, I don't have a problem with getting into the swimming pool. Well, my husband still says I can't swim. I swim, but I don't breathe while I'm swimming. I just hold my breath the whole time. Oh, you're not swimming. And I'll say, but I'm stroking and I'm getting from one end of the pool to the next. So I'm swimming. But that's a debate. But what I cannot do is float. Because when I lay back on the water, I start doing this sort of thing
get
here.
panicky.
Like And so when I was listening, I thought about when I was younger, I don't remember how old I was. My brother and I were visiting the neighbors up the street. Now, I grew up in a rural area. And so it's not street, it was up the road. To be more precise, it was up the road a piece because I grew up in the South. But they had this little pond that, had tiny little fish in it. I fell in. And I distinctly remember, even as I'm talking to you, I remember looking through the water. My brother is pulling my arm up and he's yelling for the woman to come out. And these were older people, like, well, they were all old to us, I guess. Really? That define old. They were really, really old. A lot older than they were older. And he was yelling for them to come and get me out of the water. And she did. But I think about that now, and I was thinking about that when I was sort of listening to you describe how we... And I'm pretty sure that that's what it is. It's like, yeah, so maybe I'll have to do some EFT around that and learn to float, because I remember there have been times I've been in the water, and I remember a friend of mine years ago, he would say to me, I have one finger under you. You're floating, but the minute you think that I've moved away from you, and so we do carry it, and I never really thought about, and then there were some other water events that have happened as well, so it could all be related to that. But what you're saying is you bring that to the consciousness.
We would bring it into the conscious awareness, and while we're tapping, it literally allows the energy to move through the system and be released, and it's almost like when you see an animal being chased on a safari, on a safari, where an animal of prey, a cougar or jaguar, is chasing an antelope or something, and it doesn't catch it. And as soon as the animal realizes it's safe, it'll stop running, it'll kind of look, and then it'll shake. And it literally shakes off that stress, that tension, that energy, and then puts its head down and starts eating. And if you're on the safari truck watching that, you're probably feeling it for the next 3 days.
Sure, exactly.
Because we don't have that automatic switch that turns it off and allows us to release it. So the EFT allows for that energy to be released from the body. So it can be used in the moment if you're feeling stress or tension or anxiety. If you have to give a presentation at work, if you're nervous, you can use it. But as we use it over time, we release the old stuff so that we're not as... So say, for example, everything that you've ever experienced is stuck in your body. The more traumatic or negative or unsupportive or scary or dysfunctional experiences you've had, the more of those things you have stuck. I'm thinking of like a dartboard or something in your energy system. So when something happens in present time, because it's energy and it's a vibration and everything in there has an emotional vibration, if there's something that's happening to you in the present moment that matches some vibration in your system, it literally brings that up and you get triggered. You were talking before, we get triggered, right? We have these emotional responses and we don't know where they came from. Oh my God, what the hell just happened there? Yes. What the heck just happened there? Like I acted like a 5-year-old, or I just went completely out of my mind there for a few moments.
Right.
It's literally because some part of us that is a wounded part, an unhealed part, just got triggered.
So I think then what the EFT does, so once you bring this to awareness, then you still have to do the work around changing your behavioral response to...
But the EFT helps that. And I'll give a very concrete example because I know this is a little conceptual. So I had a client come in who, his presenting problem is my wife is going to divorce me. So why? I can't get out, they were both from South America. They hadn't been back to visit their family in like 20 years because he couldn't get on an airplane because he would have a panic attack every time he got on an airplane. So this is the presenting problem. Even though, in an EFT, we say even though I have a panic attack every time I even think about getting on an airplane. I love and accept myself, or I accept myself and my feelings. So as we were working through that tapping, and I would have him describe how that felt in his body, what other emotions he would have, so fear and whatever else was coming up for him, what other thoughts he would have. Oh my God, I can't breathe. It's getting small in here. The plane is closing in on me. It looks like a tunnel, right? So we tap on all of those aspects.
So while you're talking
Yes.
about it, could you just show
So I'm going to say, so even though I have a panic attack just thinking about getting on an airplane, I deeply and completely love and accept myself. And we do this part, the setup, 3 times. Even though I completely freak out thinking about getting on an airplane, I accept myself and my feelings. Even though my wife is going to divorce me because I can't get on an airplane, I deeply and completely accept myself and my feelings. So we do the setup phrase 3 times, and then we
And
start
I just want to point
tapping.
out, each time you have to say, I love and I accept
Yes,
myself.
because what we're doing, Carolyn, usually in the past we'd say, I can't get on an airplane and I'm such an idiot, or I can't get on an airplane and I don't know why, it's so stupid, I'm a grown man, I know the airplane's not going to close in on me. So we're literally creating new neural pathways in the brain when we do that, right? A new association. This is the truth. I have panic when I think about getting on an airplane, and I accept myself anyway. So just the words are creating new neural pathways instead of those well-worn, and I'm such an idiot, or I don't know why I can't do this, or my wife is so angry with me, or blah, 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 blah.
And Tara Brach actually calls that radical acceptance, when you
Yes.
just acknowledge what it is, because it also opens your mind to creating solutions.
It is
once you
totally
accept
acceptance. Here's this thing, this problem, this challenge, and I accept myself.
it. Okay. So you start.
So you start
with your karate chops there.
And so now imagine I've already sort of talked to him about this. So I know what he's feeling in his body. He's described to me some physical sensations. He's described some emotions, and he's mentioned some other thoughts. So we do this setup phrase, and then we just start tapping on these series of points: top of the head, inside the eyebrow, outside the eye, under the nose, under the lip, outside the collarbone, and under the arm, about 4 inches. And on each of those points, I'm going to just repeat back to him what he has already told me, and he is repeating after me. So I get panic. I just panic. I freak out. I can't breathe. It feels like the airplane is closing in on me. As soon as I walk up those steps and look down, that airplane's closing in. I feel it in my chest. It gets so tight. I feel like I can't breathe. I have this weight on my chest.
Is he visualizing during this time as well?
We've already kind of, I've had him imagine what that's like for him. So as we're tapping, I might say to him, he's tapping on all these things, so was there ever a time when you felt like that before? And he says, oh my goodness, when I was a kid, my grandmother used to put me in the closet to punish me, under the stairs. It was a small, really small space, and she would close the door, and it was dark, and I was like 4 years old. So he's now accessing something that he had not had in his conscious awareness for over 50 years. And he remembers having those same feelings. I can't breathe. It's getting smaller in here. There's no air left, right? So that's one piece of it. I also asked him, when was the first time, like you used to fly back and forth, when was the first time you remember having a panic attack? Oh my gosh, it was that time we were coming home and my paperwork was not in order. And the airport security, which in that country wore big guns strapped across their chests, separated me from my wife and my children, and they put me in a different room, and I never knew if I was going to see them again. Oh, and then when he finally got approved to get on the airplane, that's when he had his first panic attack.
So in the interest of time,
Yeah.
I want, once it's brought into the awareness, what's blocking you, after that, you teach people how to do the tapping
We do the
themselves,
tapping.
so that if you're on a plane and you start to feel panicky, you can do the tapping. How often, because there is freedom that comes with it, where people, for months, they go without feeling these panic attacks again. How often would you say people need to get a tune-up for?
Well, so I say this. So we had, with this particular gentleman, 4 sessions together before he got on his plane. And then I got the phone call, we went, it was great. So literally all of that is being released as we're tapping in my office. So the work is being done as we're tapping, because it's coming into this conscious awareness, the energy of it is being released. I would recommend that he tap at home. So what I say to people, there's 2 ways that I recommend. One, as needed. If you're in the moment and something is going on that you're uncomfortable about or you're frightened about, tap in the moment. And if there are issues from the past, then over a longer period of time, there's something called the personal peace procedure, where you can literally begin tapping on anything you remember from your past that still has a negative or disruptive effect on your system, and begin to tap on that over time, maybe 10 minutes a day.
Right. So, you know, Catherine, this has been really enlightening for me, even though I knew a bit about it as well, and I hope it's been enlightening to our viewers. We are running out of time, and I would like you to tell our viewers how they can learn more about you, but also learn more about EFT techniques. Do you have a website really quickly?
I do. My website is emotionalfreedomatlast.com. So there's lots of information on there. There's a way that people can contact me. There's a little pop-up thing that says, you know, contact me. I write blogs, so all of my blogs, many of which are about EFT, are on there. I also have a YouTube channel, just my name, Catherine Ewing, E-W-I-N-G. People can go there, and not all of my videos, but some of them are about EFT.
Okay. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you so much. As always, we're running out of time because there's so much to talk about. If you would like more information about today's show, please send us an email at info@sacredintelligence.com. As always, we're so delighted that you joined us, and we'll see you next show. Bye-bye.
Thank you.